It's the Get Published radio show. And here's your host, Gerald Everett Jones, the guy who has the answers because, well, he's made all the mistakes himself.
On today's show, our topic is return of the independent bookstore. I guess it's an open question whether, in fact, indie bookstores are making a comeback. Our special guest will be Jack Leidner, past proprietor of Clemens & Company Bookstore in Newman, Georgia.
That's a brave guy.
I grew up in North Carolina. They used to burn books they didn't like down there, but most of them were made out of papyrus anyway.
The self-publishing boom is all about digital media, but of course there's still a demand for printed books, and some people prefer them, certainly if they're going to the beach, I guess. And then there's the so-called browsing experience. I mean, who really enjoys shopping for clothes on the internet? Here's the guy who's not only run an independent bookstore, but he's proudly and fiercely independent himself. Jack Leidner, welcome to Get Published, Jack.
Thanks, Gerald. Beat you to be here, as they say in Georgia.
Well, you're some distance from Georgia these days. Is that right?
Right. My son and daughter-in-law finally baited the hook correctly with a grandchild. So I visited a few times up here in Sonoma County and loved the climate, and here I am.
You started an independent bookstore after you retired, or you were semi-retired? How did that happen?
Well, yeah, I started the store after I retired. We moved to a retirement place in Georgia, and I had been fooling with the idea of a used bookstore for years, and so finally we got an opportunity to open it.
Would you say that indie bookstores are making a comeback these days?
Sure, and it's not just the statistics, I don't think. If you think about it, it's all about local customer service, sort of an intellectual farm to table, if you will, and you're sculpting your shop to fit your neighborhood. Now, you always did that, but you were so overwhelmed by competition from the big box stores, it wasn't maybe quite as obvious.
Well, if I were going to open an independent bookstore, if I were considering it, what kind of advice would you give me?
Gerald, the same advice Dorothy Parker gave writers. Kill yourself now while you're still happy.
It's like buying the boat. You know, the happiest days are the day you buy it and the day you sell it.
Yeah.
Well, I thought for a while about, opening an art gallery, and the funny thing was I was going to invest in an art gallery because I thought, well, wouldn't it be fun, to be around that all the time, and maybe I could work as hard as that and some of this other stuff. This is before the radio show. And so I happened to find myself on an airplane, and the guy who was sitting next to me had just quit his job at an art gallery. Needless to say, he said, "You sound like an intellectual. Number one, that's bad. And number two," he said, if I thought you were a car dealer, you had some experience selling used car, I would actually encourage you to go into the gallery business.
Perfect. Exactly right. Yeah, that is one of the problems owning a bookstore is love a book. Eventually you realize that in this particular regime, a book is simply a commodity. And so you're on tenterhooks there, I'm afraid. But yeah, it never hurts to be able to sell things. That's exactly right.
Was there a particular genre or type of book that your customers mostly wanted? What were you selling a lot of?
Well, now remember, I had a general shop. It was a new and used shop. And it's enough to gag a goat, but the truth is romance really probably paid the rent in most of it. But that's not the way it is, I think, today. I think today you're going to have to specialize more and go into specific topics. Well, and specifically for, areas like politics and prose in D.C. is a super example, maybe an overqualified example of the kind of thing that probably works best these days.
What is it, do you think, about the bookstore experience that should be emphasized or recaptured or thrown away?
Well, I think it's the you were talking about the used car experience, and I said sales is always important, and it is, but it doesn't have to be a phony sales pitch, particularly. As a matter of fact, it shouldn't be. It needs to be direct and honest and true. What you're doing is engaging your customers as much as you can and finding out what they want without intimidating them and trying to give them that. Now, that's easy to say, but not as easy to do, particularly since customers come in all sizes and flavors.
Well, the Borders chain, actually, I was told, I don't know whether this is strictly true, but the guys that founded it were computer experts, and actually the computerized inventory, they were an early adopter or an early developer of that, and their philosophy was that they would only automatically reorder the books that had been bought. So the idea was that over time, the local bookstore took on the complexion of the neighborhood. What do you think of that?
I have to admit, I'm not saying that it couldn't be done with AI. AI is going to be doing lots and lots of different things, but it still ignores what I think is the crucial part of small retail, the customer contact between people. And engagement is everything when you're talking about that.
And I want a place I can drop by. I want a place where I can chat with
right, and that's going to be important whether or not, and of course, if you're lucky, you'll have staff that can do that as well, because one person generally can't engage everybody, and if you have more people that can, obviously, you can engage more different types of people.
Well, I would worry if I were just restocking all the time that some of the books that maybe people should read or should pay attention to or should at least be made aware of wouldn't be on the shelves.
Right. Of course, yeah. And that's where personal recommendations really come in, as well as what's going on in the world. It's a blend. When you're in the business, you're always looking for the quirky book to come in, particularly in the used book trade in the old days. It's something that you knew that might have a little trigger for somebody else. That quirky book is invaluable. That almost always moves.
So we're talking about Jane Austen and the zombies, that kind of thing?
Well, you can be, right. And that's the other thing you've got to consider. That is your own personal taste. You have to throw it out the window on a lot of things. Compartmentalize about that as well. In other words, you order Jane Austen and the zombies, as well as Strom's book on political career. And by the way, both kind of people usually come in.
Okay, well, after the break, I know Cheyenne's got a burning question about what kinds of public activities might be conducted in an indie bookstore, so we're going to get there right after the break.
Okay, great.
Get published is all about helping you. You get published. And these days, the way to go is self-publishing, where there are no agents or editors or big publishing houses telling you can't, or making you feel like you're not good enough. Going back in history, many famous authors were self-publishers. With his own printing press, Benjamin Franklin published Poor Richard's Almanac in 1732, long before he was a famous statesman. That's how we know Ben's sayings, such as, "Fish and visitors smell in 3 days." Seriously, if you want to change your life or change the world or both, it's a great time to get in the game. Ebooks are particularly easy. With a click, you can reach a worldwide audience. Did you know that there are more people in China who read English than those of us who use the language in all the rest of the world? So if you've got a story to tell, write that memoir or that novel that's been percolating in your head. And if you're an established professional, or if you have a job you dislike or no job at all, give us that business or technical or even political book that establishes you as an expert who deserves serious attention. Yes, it's easy to get published, but understand you'll need help if you want professional results. Editors and copy editors help you clean up your prose. Book designers make the product eye-catching. And publicists help you be heard above all that social media noise. We have those support resources on our website, getpublishedradio.com. And there we've also got a request for services form, where you can get personal attention for whatever might be keeping you from getting it done. That's why we say getpublishedradio.com is your doorway to unlimited self-expression. Hey, it's all about the First Amendment. Use it or lose it.
Welcome back to Get Published, where it's, all about getting published.
We're talking with former bookstore owner and entrepreneur Jack Leidner about the resurgence of the independent bookstore. And I know right before the break, Cheyenne had a question about what kinds of public events might go in a bookstore. What did Cheyenne?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of thinking of like poetry readings, book signings, concerts, book clubs. Is that something a bookstore should really get involved in?
Absolutely. Particularly these days, I think. Again, you're trying to make it as much like their home, a club, if you will, as you possibly can. A place to stop in, not just when you're looking for books, but often to talk about whatever talks well in your community. So, yeah, do what works.
I like that pub analogy. In Los Angeles, a bar is a noisy place where somebody may go to see and be seen. But I mean, I'm from Chicago. A bar in Chicago is a place where you go to get away from the cold, and there might be a television set on, and there might be 3 people sitting around, but, it's a comfortable place to be.
I worked in a bookstore, and in some ways I was the worst possible person to work in a bookstore.
Why is that?
I am an author, and all I did was read the books. To heck with the customers.
But didn't somebody ever ask you what should I read next?
Well, the way this bookstore worked was this big one that is now a pet store, I believe. Pets is that the books were arranged according to what was selling and what were people already buying. So ideally, a customer walks in, doesn't need to ask anybody anything. There it is in front of him. But a bookstore like Jack is running here, yes, it's absolutely essential you have staff who knows where these particular interesting, unusual picks are. I would spend I knew where everything was because I walked through that bookstore constantly looking at stuff, being fascinated by stuff, and I'm an author myself, so it's good to see.
But Tom, you've had bookstore signing. You've experienced bookstore signings from the other side of the desk, as it were, where you're the presenter. But in an indie bookstore, sometimes the amount of square foot you've got is about as big as a closet.
For an indie signing, no charge. I would do it for nothing. Really?
Well, I'm sure it'd be great fun, but what I'm saying is their real estate is precious small to like 3 folding chairs may be all they can cram in the place.
Oh, that's a good point. All right. Well, I haven't ever done a signing for an indie store. It's always been for a chain store.
Yeah, the Barnes & Noble has a separate room for that often.
And yes.
Well, Jack, did your store have a meeting place, a venue where people could come?
Right. As a matter of fact, yeah, we started fairly early on that because, again, we were out in the middle of nowhere in rural Georgia, and we definitely were in new territory. So we had to do some of these things already in advance in order to draw as much audience as possible.
Well, what kinds of events? What would you promote? What didn't?
Well, local stuff is always great. Okay.
What do you mean by local stuff? A school board?
Local books. Well, generally, sometimes you had to run against a school board, but that's a different.
Oh, that's right. You did that. I forgot.
Yeah.
But yeah, grassroots clubs, say, or
generally stuff again about local histories are always good. Local cookbooks are particularly particularly well, as an example. And again, remember where it was. So I sold a lot of books on religion of all kinds. I had a pretty extensive religious section.
So performance, spoken word, anything like that?
For what, please?
Spoken word or poetry?
Poetry sold, but kind of, which always gave me some hope, but quietly, kind of on the side,
The strange people who would sneak into the store.
But the stuff that really moved, again, was military history. Sold a lot of military history in the shop for similar reasons. But yeah, I mean, again, but as far as events are concerned, we did poetry readings, and we would move a few things, and we did a lot of music that came in, and of course you have the grandfather or grandparent effect if you can involve kids, and the more kids the better into whatever you're doing. That worked out too.
So you're talking about like elementary age kids who would be looking for children's books and records and things like that?
Right, children's books, and just to get folks into the shop. If they're grandchildren of whatever age are doing something, you figure you can add at least 6 people for every
So family friendly, of
I used
course.
to go to those when I was a kid. My mom would take me to the local bookstore. They'd have someone, read a kid's book and do all the funny
yeah.
voices.
They
And,
do that in libraries too. these
Yeah.
days,
yeah, it was great.
Well, that's, the public library, they often do have the auditorium connected to it or the meeting room. And I do think as a venue, and again, I'm coming back to that notion of the pub. Jack, I think that really does kind of encapsulate what an indie bookstore could be as a neighborhood hangout, maybe.
Yeah, well, I think that's what it has to be. In these days, you're looking for the specific human connection, kind of human connections you cannot make on the internet.
And were you involved with a restaurant at one point?
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
Are there similarities there? I mean, what lessons learned about consumer marketing?
Well, sure. It's very much the same sort of thing, but different considerations. It was something I always wanted to do. It was great fun, and with the exception of the first Gulf War, probably the hardest work I ever did. But like the old joke goes, Gerald, how to make a small fortune in the restaurant business. Start out with a large one.
Right.
Having neither, I lasted only about 2.5 years, but
that's a run.
But again, it wasn't bad, and I enjoyed every minute of it. But you do learn it again. It's the same thing as far as connecting to people is concerned. Don't engage them. Find out what they want. Don't intimidate them. With the wine list, make it easy for them, make it comfortable for them.
Okay, well, when we come back from the break, I want to hear a little bit more about your personal tastes in literature because I know you're a well-read guy.
Oh, my.
In all the history of the world, with today's technology, it's never been easier to get published, to self-publish your printed book, ebook, audiobook, even multimedia ebook. And not just novels and memoirs or how-to books and histories, although if that's what you've got, let's have it. But also poetry, spoken word, graphic novel, cartoons, children's picture book, interactive video, games, virtual reality, and imaginative mashups of all this stuff. Get into the game. Along the way, you'll no doubt need some professional help from an editor, a book designer, a publicist. But isn't the investment in yourself worth it? How about you take the money you'd spend on your next vacation and get famous instead? GetPublishedRadio.com. That's our support website where we've got links to all the resources you'll need. And don't forget that request for services form if you crave some personal attention. That's GetPublishedRadio.com. Hey, it's all about the First Amendment. You can use it or lose it.
Runke Productions, the audio magicians, can take your radio shows, podcasts, audiobooks, and ads from the streets of New York to the outer reaches of the galaxy.
I think we need more echo at the end of that.
Look, visit us at runkeeproductions.com.
I still think we need more cowbell.
Welcome back to Get Published, where it's, all about getting published.
We've been talking with Jack Leidner, the founder of Clemens & Company Bookstore in Newman, Georgia, who has now gone on to other pursuits. And Jack, you've given us, I think, an interesting sidelight on the resurgence of the bookstore. But one of the things I'm curious about, in full disclosure, I should tell you guys that I've actually known Jack since high school. And Jack was a founding member of an organization that we called the Howard County Erudition Society, which included 6 geeks who basically couldn't get dates. I knew back then that Jack had a particular proclivity for reading books. And Jack, I'm just curious about not only what you've enjoyed over the years, but what kind of stuff you read.
Okay, well, I'll get to that in a second. A little clarity is necessary here. It's 20 geeks.
Uh-oh.
Did I malign you?
You mean a little?
Secondly, they paid dues And thirdly, we had put on parties in order, of course.
To get those days.
Well, to get those days. Yeah, that's a gentle way of saying. Yeah.
That's
now,
what chicks are into, dudes with
what
books.
Was the question about reading?
Yeah, sure.
No sarcasm there.
No.
Big books.
They like dudes who could read, but not necessarily.
I read history. I read history a lot. I read classical history. I read military history. I read political stuff. And these days, that's trying.
It piques your interest, of course.
Yes, very trying. And occasionally, I read just for the sheer joy of it. I'm rereading all the Nero Wolfe stuff recently because I need to get to some place where I can hide, and that's a great way of doing it. You listen to audiobooks. There's Stephen Fry's doing all the Sherlock Holmes, and it's just tremendous lately. And again, it's a good place to hide from the current situation.
Well, but weren't you into? I think you were one of the first persons who got me interested in the likes of like Thurber and Mencken. Humor.
Oh yeah, I'm looking. Still have my Mencken collection, they're.
Well, you were quoting Dorothy Parker unashamedly.
You can quote Mencken once a day without any particular difficulty. Right now, but I always enjoyed that, and that was, of course, being from Baltimore. That was a big deal.
Oh, that's right, and Tyler country now, as we now know.
Yeah, right.
Speaking of girls and books, I was from the South. I graduated from college without any girlfriends that I'd had or anything. I moved to New York, and my cousin said, "Tom, don't worry. The girls up here love guys who read." And he was absolutely right.
That was New York City.
New York City.
Well,
you live.
We should let people know that this esteemed college, Thomas Page, was an original madman in Madison Avenue. He was an ad man, and that was New York City bars, cigarettes, booze, and you actually ended up marrying an airline hostess.
That's right. So
you lived the life, man.
Worked for me. So
there you go.
Head to Mad Avenue, except they're never mind.
Well,
that's how I ended up in Georgia. The never mind part. But anyway, go ahead, please.
I'm curious about what your opinion is on the future of book retail. I mean, you have stores that are going to pop up, like Amazon's plans to open a retail store. What do you think about stuff like that? Is that where we're headed?
You mean with the automated cashier, et cetera, et cetera?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the opposite of what we're preaching here today, anyway. And I am sure they'll have an algorithm that will supply books for X percent of people at the right time in the right place and all of that. But I really do believe that it's the human contact that makes the difference.
Okay, and I'm going to conclude, Jack, with the thought that we'll make this wager for the future that every Amazon store will have an Amazon greeter. Thanks for being with us, Jack.
And an Amazon bartender.
Yeah, but the trouble is they'll be at minimum wage.
Your email address, Jack, before we go off? How can they get in touch with you, Jack?
Get in touch. It's easy. My email, it is old, all lowercase, old, P-I, Papa India, for photo interpreter, retired, @gmail.com.
And thanks for being with us today, Jack. It's been a pleasure.
Great fun.
Enjoyed it. Thanks a lot. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jack.
And that's our show. Get Published is all about self-publishing and self-expression. And that getting published and the ease of getting published these days is really all about exercising the First Amendment in this free society of ours. What we need these days are more ideas. Even though we're deluged with information, we need more good ideas. And we need debate about those ideas. Book-length debate. Not just snippets that are posted on social media, not just selfies and cute pictures of your pets, the things that you really think. And remember, because in self-publishing there are no gatekeepers out there, that is the good news and that is the bad news. So hire some good help. Perhaps you found that here. You may find it on the website, whatever you're looking for, whether it's an editor or a book designer or somebody help you promote. But hire good help, get good advice, and by all means, please Get Published.
The Get Published radio show with Gerald Everett Jones is produced by Runkey Productions. Our producer is Lori Marple, and your announcer is Bill Navarro. Music by Jason Shaw. You'll find links to support services on our website, getpublishеdradio.com. So whether you're an author, a publisher, or a self-promoter, get help at getpublishedradio.com. And thanks for listening.